Before you even say a word out of your mouth that you definitely haven't even brushed yet, no, this is not recency bias. I swear to you on everything that holds me true, I had this video planned to make after the Singapore weekend, so don't think I'm making this just because George won that race, which even then, I am still justified since I don't know how a real human being can sit down in front of their box and see George win how he did, and then go on Twitter and be like, he's overrated, he's not good, he's a car merchant. Let me tell you something, George Russell is not arguably, he is top 3 driver on the grid. Since you give this man a Mercedes or any car that has the juice, he will get the absolute maximum out of it. In Canada this year, a place that wasn't cold at the time by the way, George took pole just like he did last year. Unlike last year, the moment he left the P1 slot on the race, he held that position all the way to the end of the race despite never fully dropping max to take his first win of the season. But the true cherry on top is that Singapore win, where after a little accident in FP2, he came out of nowhere in Q3 to take pole position from Max, and despite Max yet again starting behind him, this time on softer tires, George didn't care, he just ran away in the race, taking his arguably best victory in his career. Plus, there were plenty of other races in the season where McLaren were full seconds ahead of the field, yet George was right there fighting with them, and on most occasions not beating them, but bitching them, like famously in Bahrain. George this year, like I said, is undeniably top 3 on the grid with 2 wins, 2 poles, and many podiums in a car that is usually not fast enough to fight for wins. And what if I were to tell you, this man is still uncontracted to drive for Mercedes or any other team on the grid, at least at the time of writing. Maybe he got a contract by the time you're watching this, but the very fact that currently right now, George has won 2 races and done so much for Merc this season, and he is still without a contract? I mean, what the hell, Toto? Have you been taking stupid pills? Plus, that's not to mention how the fans of the sport like to think George is some overrated driver who is not as good as everyone thinks he is. Despite doing so much in this sport, it seems it is never enough for George to be respected by his team and fans alike. So I'm gonna sit my fat ass down and tell you why George is one of the most disrespected drivers on the grid currently. Go join the Discord to stand on trial for your opinion, and subscribe if you're new if you're a George Russell truther. So enough yapping and let's get to quacking. But before that, make sure to go over to the Crash Happy channel where we have released another podcast episode, so go give it a watch or I'll tickle you.
A good weather for a race, but especially for a dog.
So, to properly understand George Russell as a driver and a person, we need to look at his journey to making it to the top. Like all Formula 1 drivers, George started karting at a really young age, 7 to be specific, and he got things from the jump. In the cadet classes, some of his first positions in the standings would be impressive before starting to win some in his third year of karting. From there, he got more impressive results, and as he grew and went into more competitive and older competitions, then his talent would truly shine. From 2009 to 2010, George won 6 titles, including 4 in a row across different competitions, and even the one that he didn't win in, he still finished second in runners-up. From there, his name started to become known and also started to race against familiar names you might know today, such as Alex Albon and Charles Leclerc, which by the way, George would win in those series where he raced against them. So of course, winning like this does not make George Russell some underground name. He got major attention, and in 2014, he would make the move up to cars in some small F4 series, such as the BRDC F4 Championship, which he won by the way, and some bigger ones like the Formula Renault Championships, where he impressed by finishing in 4th place. At the end of that year, he would also be given a GP3 test at Abu Dhabi, where clearly he impressed all the old men surveying him since they gave him an F3 seat for 2015 and no plane ticket hopefully. In his first F3 season, he would finish in 6th, winning 1 race and getting 3 podiums, and it's clear that this guy has got some major potential. He was competing with guys like Charles and even beating Albon in the standings that same year. However, he did have some problems he needed sorting. For starters, his qualifying pace, weirdly enough, was a weak spot for him at one point, and I don't think I need to explain to you why qualifying is important. However, he did kind of make up for it with his wheel-to-wheel driving and his race pace in general. With further refinements in another year of F3, George could sort out these issues and truly start winning dominantly here just like he was in karting. But there seems to be a problem right now with George, and it's one as old as time. And why is that?
Because I'm all out of money!
To try and find some funding, George, and I kid you not, somehow reached out and made contact with Toto Wolff, team principal of Mercedes, so at this point in time, we're dominating the field with Lewis Hamilton. And what did he do? He made a goddamn PowerPoint presentation on why George should be a Mercedes Junior and have his career funded. And somehow it worked. I mean, he wasn't signed to be a Mercedes Junior immediately. However, Toto did offer to fund his journey, but even that couldn't happen immediately due to team politics at the time, you know the such. But George in 2016 would switch to Mercedes-powered F3 team, which gave Toto the cause to test him out as a simulator driver and a potential junior driver. So George in F3 needed to at least do very good and impress Big Daddy Wolff, and I'm happy to report he did just that. Now, despite having a few engine DNFs and the major debuff of Papa Stroll buying good Mercedes engines and Williams suspensions and paying off Prema personnel, which included drivers to 8 lengths and everything, leading to this absolute joke of a season, George finished in 3rd, taking home 2 wins, 3 poles, and 10 podiums. However, George still impressed enough in F3 that year that Daddy Wolff would sign George up to the Merc Academy, promising that he will fund George's journey so long as George wins F3 and F2, no excuses. So for F3 in the next year, he signed with ART, who were the dominant team at the time, and George himself continued that streak by winning the title with relative ease, which prompted both Toto and ART to promote him to F2 for the following year in 2018. Now, if you've been around for a while, you would know of the mighty F2 2018 season that we had. That year, we had George Russell, Lando Norris, Alex Albon, Nick DeVries pre-wash, Artem Markelov, who was a streets never forget driver, all duking it out for wins on a race-by-race basis. It was peak, man. I don't know what to tell you. So in an ultra-competitive grid, George would find it difficult to stand out, and by the mid-season, Lando was leading the standings and looking set to win it. But then George lucked in. He started taking podium after podium, and it's not like Lando fell off. He was doing the same, but George was way more consistent, which all led to George Russell taking the title from Lando and winning the F2 title by 68 points. The thing that really sells the season as being impressive is that we know by now that F2 is not exactly what we would call a fair series. Hell, half the junior formulas are not. But yet in 2018, Lando had an almighty engine and Albon's car always looked competitive every week, so saying that George had the best engine is not really telling the whole story. So after taking back-to-back dominant titles in F3 and F2, something that only Pastry and Gabby have done since then, it came to no one's surprise when George got hired to F1 by Toto. Surely George gets into Racing Point, right? Since they're Mercedes powered, have a great car with low pressure, and was previously a test driver for them. Or maybe he goes to Alfa Romeo since Kimi will be a great mentor and Charles is heading to Ferrari. But unfortunately, George would have to sign with Williams, and Stroll bought Racing Point and Checo was still too good to drop, but clearly that didn't matter a year later, and Alfa Romeo had already signed Giovinazzi. Okay, but Williams aren't that bad, right? They're doing great this year, but see, this isn't the Williams you know right now. This is broke as fuck Williams. I mean, the team barely made it out to preseason, which I don't think it takes a genius to figure out why that's a bad thing, and this is all because the team were extremely broke and developing their car using strings and Google. So George would quite obviously have a miserable first season in F1, and despite having extremely good qualifying pace, I mean, he was never all qualified, he did show poor race pace since again, that car was running on hopes and dreams. So to be honest, I wouldn't blame people for thinking George is mid since his race performances didn't exactly show him in the best light, but he needs time, and luckily, since you know, Lewis is winning and Valtteri isn't useless yet, Toto gave George time. So for 2020, Williams needed money, so they broke Kubica's other arm and hired Nicholas Latifi, whose only worth as a Formula 1 driver is having money and causing the biggest global catastrophe since World War II. This year, George wouldn't fool around, so despite scoring no points for Williams again, he would have amazing qualifying performances like in Hungary, but perhaps maybe George would never make it and show what he is worth. But did he catch that? I said George never scored points for Williams this year. However, he did score points. With who, you may ask? You know, with Mercedes. In the penultimate round of the 2020 season, you know, the year of COVID, Lewis Hamilton, who already birthed his 7th title, got COVID, which saw him not participate for the Secure Grand Prix. Now, Mercedes could only run one car for the weekend, but instead, they decided that with Lewis out, let's give George one race to see what he is truly made of. So for that race, George is now driving the fastest F1 car ever built, and he needed to impress if he is to stay in F1 for the foreseeable future. And what did he do? He not only impressed, he got Valtteri Bottas, bent him over submissively, and fucked the ever-living shit out of him like George had been the dominant one all this time. George nearly got pole, but the fact that Valtteri barely beat him by 300ths, which in this era was extremely close and unusual, was embarrassing. And even more embarrassing, the race started and George immediately took the lead and kept it. George, and I kid you not, was set to win this race dominantly. However, I did say was. There was a safety car brought out for ironically George's replacement at Williams, and when Merc opted to pit, they mixed some of Bottas's tires on the car like they were amateurs, which caused George to pit again or risk disqualification, but all is not lost. He made his way back up to second and was starting to catch Checo in the lead and looked set to win it again, but his tire got punctured. He needed to pit again, which now saw his win gone for good. He finished in 9th, which was still great, but what could have been. Either way, Toto was convinced he was the real deal, so for 2021, George at Williams still had one of his best seasons ever by again showing up for qualifying, and this time the race, since he got 4 points finishes and one of them was even a bloody podium. Now context, it was in Spa, which if you know anything about the 2021 race, well, you would know there was no race. So he only got half points, which was 9 points for it, but in torrential qualifying, he still qualified second place and nearly pole if it weren't for Max at the buzzard. So all of this, plus Bottas being generally asked in 2021, led Toto to making the call. George Russell will be a Mercedes driver for 2022, and you know the rest of the story. 6 wins later, and we are here today. Despite a really poor 2023 season, George has showed up for Mercedes and more since in 2022 and 24, he beat Lewis Hamilton pretty fair and square, and in 2025, Mercedes is truly his home. Or is it? Because remember the whole contract thing. So before we discuss that, let's talk about some criticisms fans may have of him. The main criticism I see of George by the fans doesn't have anything to do with his driving, ironically enough. It's the fact that they think he's a total dickhead. Qatar 2024 is the obvious example, since in that race, George qualified in second and Max on pole. However, the race started with the position swapped. Why is that? Well, that's because George snitched on Max like a hall monitor because Max broke the rules by like a nanosecond. This promoted the FIA to give Max a ginormous, whopping 1-place grid penalty, and this pissed the fuck out of Max. So much so that in Abu Dhabi, George called Max out, calling him dangerous and a crybaby, and basically being a negative thing in the sport, while Max called him a loser. The community took to Max's side, since I mean, George, you were a dick. You could fight it out on track instead of creating needless problems by being the kid that points out that the teacher forgot to collect the homework. There are many other moments of George being an asshole and complaining all the time, so much so that I could probably make a full-length video just covering that, but I'll keep it short and move on. Another criticism people may have of George is the fact that they don't think he is all of that, or that he is just flat out mid or bad. Now we call these people stupid since they clearly don't know what they're talking about. Just kidding, they may have a point, because in case you missed it while I was detailing George's career, George has kind of been blessed with the biggest factor in the junior series, which is bullshit. George would be accused of having a really fast engine all throughout his F3 career, and especially in F2, with some accusers even being Lando and Albon. This leads people to believe that he looks better than he does, plus even then, some don't get all analytical or wordy. Some look at Russell drive and simply are moved, and to that I say, I respect it. I've always held the belief that the eye test is the most important factor in not only racing, but sport as a whole. It reaches a point where you get too wordy and too analytical that you start thinking everything is a statistic, and that's what determines if someone is good or not. But man, just look at them. If you're moved, appreciate it, and if you aren't, make it known with some evidence. Personally, I look at Russell and I am moved, but I can respect it if others are not. However, all I have to say is, there is a reason why Toto signed this kid off of a fucking PowerPoint presentation. No sane man is actually gonna believe what George did, and Toto is not insane, I think. So if people like Toto, who mind you, had Lewis and Nico sucking each other up for wins at that point when he signed George, clearly he saw something in him. So if you aren't moved, okay, but don't discredit his talent and pace, I'd say. And if you do, seriously, what is wrong with you? I'm not even being mean. Give me your best argument in the comments. I'm genuinely curious. But despite all that and all the trust that Toto has put in George, why the hell does he not have a contract yet? Well, the whole contract debacle is very complicated with more nuance and some political discussions, so I'll try my best to explain it. But basically, George wants a huge contract, better pay, and less forced media appearances. Toto and Merc basically want the opposite of most of it. I mean, I'm sure Toto is willing to pay George the big bucks, but there is a problem right now in Mercedes. Ever since Lewis left, no one kind of cares about them anymore. Lewis was an icon who kept Mercedes in the light, but currently, George is not an icon, at least to the level of Lewis, or even people like Max, Charles, or Lando are. Perhaps Toto wants George to go more public with himself in an effort to push the Russell agenda on the general public, like how McLaren did with Lando or the other drivers I mentioned. George obviously doesn't want this, and what doesn't help Merck's case is that even if George was willing to, his contract wouldn't be that long. And despite this whole debacle being done with for a while, I imagine Toto still wants Max at the team, since Max's aura would bring so much to the Mercedes brand. Imagine former enemy becomes Mercedes' #1 asset and Mercs are to win again. That story, whether you like it or not, would be way bigger than a simple junior to champion story, and even then, it's kind of Mercedes' own fault that story isn't bigger, similar to how big it is at McLaren. So the reason why George isn't going to get a long contract is because I would imagine Toto wants Mercedes to be in the spotlight again, and instead of trusting George, they want Max and take the easy way out. And even then, when I say they want Max, I'm not even necessarily talking about dropping George even, since George and Max, despite how chaotic it could be, could very well be teammates in the future, which is probably what Toto wants ideally, but is keeping George on a short contract just in case he does have to get rid of him. Now, I could be wrong, so please let me know your theories, but that's mine. And it's a shame really, because George is mighty good. I mean, I didn't spend like all of this video talking about his career if it wasn't good, right? Like I said, no matter what you may think of George, maybe your fancy analytics and statistics are enough for him, or he doesn't pass the eye test, you have to admit, he does have meat on his bones. Even if you don't believe he is Max's level, you need to acknowledge his game, since I don't know how you could sit watching the Singapore Grand Prix this year or Vegas last year and still believe he is bad. George, throughout all of his career, has been known for having extreme race pace and good wheel-to-wheel ability on top of his sensational qualifying pace, and even though in 2019 he did fall off in the races, and he is a known terrorist who has drivers fully turned into him, look at him now. When was the last time George made contact with somebody when overtaking and he was the one at fault? When was the last time he didn't just drive the car 100% for whatever reason? It has been a pretty damn long time, and this is why I believe right now, George is entering his prime. If George is to win a title in his career, it's 100% going to happen in the next 4 to 6 years. George's wheel-to-wheel game is seriously good right now, since he is balancing the terrorism with class. His race pace is reaching its peak, since given the opportunity, this guy will disappear out front. His quali pace, as we know, is wicked fast and is able to always extract the car's ability. If you don't think he is top 3 on the grid, okay, whatever, more power to you. But to come out and be like he is a bad driver or even mid, I sincerely hope you know you're wrong, and you will be proven wrong in the next 4 years. I would say George is one of only 2 drivers currently who, given the car, can and will beat Max in a battle throughout the entire race. That alone should cement him as top 3 on the grid, but you're more than free to prove me wrong. Anyways, that was why I believe George Russell is disrespected by everybody. Mercedes, wake the fuck up and give him a 5-year contract, especially if you're good next year, since Kimi is still developing and won't win titles next year. They would have to be idiots to let go of George for even someone like Max, since I'm willing to bet the benefits of Max won't even be that big compared to just keeping George. So make the right call, Mercedes, please. Anyways, I want to give a quick shout out to all members of the flock for the continued support, and make sure to join if you want cool benefits as well as just helping me out. Anyways, if you enjoyed today's video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe since it helps me out. Make sure to let me know in the comments what you think of this, and as always, have an amazing day.
Good weather for the duck.